Good evening, everybody. How are you? Oh, please, Santa Monica College, how are you? Oh, that's great. How many students do we have in the house? That's great. Good evening. My name is Richard Tavilder and Jeswin, and
I'm Sherry Davis.
I was about to say I'm Sherry Davis also, but I could only be Richard. We're the co-directors of the Santa Monica College Public Policy Institute.
And we are thrilled to welcome you to the SMC Public Policy Institute 2015 Fall Forum, The Ways Public Policy Sustains Creative Arts. We have a number of elected officials and leaders from our communities with us tonight. We want to thank them for their commitment to public service and to making arts and education important priorities.
We are very honored to welcome our Santa Monica College trustees. The chair of the board, Rob Rader, is with us. Our vice chair, Dr. Louise Jaffe. Trustees, Dr. Susan Amanoff, Dr. Nancy Greenstein, Barry Snell, and Dr. Andrew Walzer. We'd like to do a special shout out and a special note about Trustee Nancy Greenstein, whose vision and persistence made the Public Policy Institute happen here at Santa Monica College. Nancy, we hope you're proud of what you were instrumental in creating, and we very much love and care for all of the hard work you have done to support our program. This evening, we'd also be honored to welcome SMC Interim President Jeff Shimizu. He's here, along with Vice Presidents Georgia Lorenz and Don Gerard, and of course, our Dean of Academic and Community Relations. She's our Dean, our PPI Dean, Kirsten Elliott.
And we welcome Malibu Mayor Laura Rosenthal, who has also brought with her 2 arts commissioners from Malibu. We welcome Santa Monica Mayor Pro Tem Tony Vasquez and Councilmember Pam O'Connor, as well as Santa Monica's new city manager, Rick Cole. And from the Santa Monica Malibu Unified School District, we welcome School Board President Lori Lieberman, School Board Member Richard Tavilder and Jeswin, and we're so happy to see our Superintendent Sandra Lyon here this evening as well. So we wanted to tell you a little bit about the Public Policy Institute. The SMC Public Policy Institute, we commonly refer to as PPI, was established in 2010 with founding director and now Los Angeles County Supervisor, the Honorable Sheila Kuehl. Dr. Richard Tavilder and Jeswin worked with Sheila and Professor Christina Gabler to create PPI, and I, the newbie, had the pleasure of joining the team earlier this year. PPI gives Santa Monica College students the opportunity to earn an associate's degree or certificate of achievement in public policy in this interdisciplinary, experiential learning-oriented program. Our graduates and current students are women and men who represent the wonderfully diverse student body of SMC. They care deeply about approaching the world's problems with thoughtful, just, innovative solutions. And we invite you to stay informed about PPI, our students, programs, and community events through the emails we send periodically and through our website, smc.edu/PPI. And to stay informed about SMC, we invite you to sign up for SMC in Focus. It's a monthly e-newsletter that brings to life the breadth and depth of educational opportunities and accomplishments taking place at SMC all the time. Making this offer too good to pass up, SMC's Public Information Office is offering a prize. For every 100th subscriber to SMC in Focus, the lucky person will not only be superbly informed, but also will win 2 tickets to any show at the Broad stage. So, look for the sign-up sheets in the lobby. They're on the Public Policy Institute table, and you can either drop your business card or you can write down your name and email address.
By definition, the word forum is an assembly for the people for the discussion of questions of public interest. And of course, it's fall, so we organize and plan this fall forum to bring people together around the intersection of public policy and art in its many forms. We have the art form of dance, in the Nutcracker performances by dancers from West Side Ballet, and the art form of music in live orchestral performances by the Santa Monica College Orchestra of Tchaikovsky's beautiful composition. Tonight, our speakers will talk about the visual arts and the amazing collection on display at the Broad Museum. And of course, we are here on the Broad stage, the very special venue for many forms of performing arts, opera, theater, spoken word, and tonight, a community keynote conversation.
And making this fall forum possible, we are extremely grateful to many partners who are listed in your programs. And just a note about your program, you can see that it gives you the information about tonight. It also gives you information about the other events taking place this week and beyond. We want to especially recognize SMC associated students, our SMC student government. They're one of our key partners and sponsors for the Fall Forum. We also greatly appreciate the support we get from SMC Associates, a support organization of the college, and from the Santa Monica College Foundation. Thanks also to the Broad Stage, whose new director, Wiley Howsam, is joining us this evening as well. Thank you, Wiley. The West Side Ballet, the City of Santa Monica, the Los Angeles County Board of Supervisors, KCRW, the Santa Monica Malibu Unified School District and PTA Council, and our many, many colleagues at SMC who collaborated with us to make this evening happen.
And all of us who work at Santa Monica College and who are professors and teachers, we are in the endeavor because of our students. And I just want to do one more shout out for the students who are here. Represent students. That's great. We have many of our public policy and political science students here this evening. I hope that many of the community members had an opportunity to mix and mingle with SMC students during our reception, and I know they'll be here afterwards. And we would be remiss if we didn't recognize two of our other partners. We have Carrie Ann Farrell Lang, who is Hines, excuse me, is one of our, Carrie Ann's gonna kill me, I did that twice tonight. And of course, no one is more focused on students than a key member of our team, and that's Ms. Carolyn Baugh. So thank you to Carolyn and to Carrie Ann, and we're so happy you're here.
Thank you. So at this time, we'd like to welcome Richard Kendall, Chair of the Board of the Broad Stage, to make some special introductions. Mr. Kendall is the founder and partner of the law firm Kendall, Brill, and Kelly. He has served on the Broad Stage Board since 2011 and became chair a year ago. Richard began his legal career as a federal prosecutor. His firm specializes in complex litigation in a number of different areas, including international, entertainment, environmental, and banking issues. He has argued 2 cases before the United States Supreme Court. He lives in Los Angeles, and joining him here this evening is his wife, acclaimed author Lisa See. Thank you for being here this evening, Richard Kendall.
Good evening, everyone. We have a great treat tonight, and I'm going to have the pleasure of introducing the folks who are going to be sitting in those comfortable chairs and enlightening us all. Austin Beutner and Joanne Heyler. I'll first tell you a little bit about Austin, and I'll keep this brief because I know you all would love to hear from them shortly. Austin began with an extremely successful career as a businessman, and since that time, he's dedicated his life to civic leadership in Los Angeles. He's focused extensively on public policy issues. He served as the deputy mayor of this city from 2010 until 2013. And then after testing the waters as a candidate for mayor, he decided instead to turn to publishing. And he was the publisher and the CEO of the LA Times and the San Diego Tribune. And while doing all of this, he's also managed to find the time to serve on many boards. He was my predecessor as chair of the Broad Stage. He also is a board member of Cal Arts, showing his real focus on the arts. He's also active on many other boards, including the California Nature Conservancy, the Los Angeles Fund for Public Education, and the Pacific Council on International Relations. And that's just a partial list. Austin and his wife are also very active philanthropists. One of their real passions is finding ways for school children in low-income areas to get assistance with their vision. Turns out that a great many children, as many as 1 in 5, really can't see the blackboard. They have trouble learning how to read just because they don't have glasses. They can't see clearly enough to learn, and this makes it very challenging, results in bad educational outcomes. Austin is the kind of person, having served on a board with him, I know this, who sees a problem and doesn't agonize so much about the problem, just starts focusing on a solution right away. Austin, together with his wife Virginia, have come up with mobile vision centers that travel throughout the schools in the low-income parts of Los Angeles and also in Northern California, and have provided glasses and other vision aids to thousands of school children. It's really a wonderful program. It's a good example of how you can use, you can identify a public policy issue and then come up with a way to solve it. Joanne Heyler probably has the best job in the art world in Los Angeles today. She is the founding director of the new Contemporary Art Museum, the Broad Museum, right across from Disney Hall downtown. Joanne began working at the Broad Art Foundation in 1989, and she has curated Eli and Edythe Broad's extensive art collection and their major investments in the art world and their involvement in museums in Los Angeles and elsewhere in the country since 1995. Joanne has been, in the past few months, as those of you who follow the museum world know, involved night and day in the debut of the new museum downtown. Joanne was instrumental in the building of the museum, had to become an expert in everything from seismic fitting for how you can build a building that will survive just about anything that could happen while hanging incredibly valuable artworks on its walls. Everything from that to lighting and the million things that go into construction of a building, and then very importantly, curated the collection that is the inaugural collection downtown at the museum, which everyone should try to get and see, and I'm sure you're going to be hearing more about that today. Joanne, like Austin, is passionate about the role of arts in our civic community, and I'm sure we're going to have a very interesting conversation this evening as the two of them, Austin and Joanne, talk about the role of arts in our cultural landscape. So without further ado, Austin and Joanne. Okay.
Thanks. Well, welcome, and thank you, Richard, for the kind introduction. And I would also be remiss if I didn't acknowledge Sherry Davis, who has been my muse in terms of bringing this group together. So thank you both for inviting us to have a conversation. As I look out at this audience, having been in this performance space so many different times, this is kind of a unique gathering of young and old, and I think that's kind of cool. We have students, and we have many patrons of the art, and there aren't too many things which draw that diverse a crowd to this venue. And the other I noticed, is the first time I've ever been here, that the coat rack is full, so I guess winter is with us. We're going to talk about something which is near and dear to my heart today, which is that intersection of art in its many forms and public policy. And I thought, as a place to start before Joanne and I begin a conversation, is just to put it in context a little bit. How many of you might have seen recently all the front page stories about the potential for the NFL to return to Los Angeles? Just quick show of hands. All right, everybody's seen that article. How many know what is the number one, or thought of as the number one draw of visitors in Los Angeles? That would be Dodger Stadium, about 3 million people a year. Now, if I told you about 10 million people visit just the top 10 or 11 cultural institutions in this community, most of you might find that a surprise. If I went on to then explain the impact that has, whether 10% of those, more than 1 million school-age children each year going to these cultural institutions, educating the next generation of Angelenos about how to be inspired by their own art, how to share a sense of community. Or if I told you that for most of those institutions, almost 20% of their visitors come from out of California, bringing tourist dollars, not just patronizing the venue itself, but restaurants, hotels, and going shopping on 3rd Street Promenade. So beyond just the experience we share in a sense of community in these many different arts and cultural institutions, they're a big driver in our economy, create jobs. They're how we educate the future generation of Angelenos about differing ways to relate to the world around them. So I'm a big, big believer that any investment we can make as a community in cultural institutions pays many dividends. Now we'll talk this evening about the intersection where public policy can make a difference, where it can be that catalyst, where it can do more than just, frankly, birth another football stadium, but rather birth institutions like the one we're in today, or the one we'll use as an example, the Broad Museum downtown, and all the implications that has for the community. On my left is someone who really has my admiration, not just for what she's done in the arts and her expertise as a curator, the founding curator of the museum, but I think by my reckoning, next to Edythe Broad, she has worked with Eli second longest. And for those of us who know and love Eli, that's a long time of service. So welcome, Joanne.
Sure. Thank you. It's a pleasure
We'll
to be
talk
here.
about the Broad as an example, not just uniquely. This is not a conversation only about the Broad, but as an example, and it's a fresh example. And I thought we might start just, how is it? I've been myself. I think it's fantastic. Anyone in the audience who hasn't been, even if you're not deep into contemporary art, I think the way it explores and opens it up to any of us, those who know a lot about contemporary art and those who know very little. So I encourage you to go. But I thought, Joanne, let's just start. How's it going?
Yeah, well, it's going rather well. We are an institution that's only 7 weeks old. We opened on September 20th. And I'm very, very proud to say that we have had over 125,000 people through our doors already.
Wow.
As many of you may know, partly to address what we knew would be some demand, although it's even greater than we expected, we set up a system by which you can reserve your free tickets in advance. Reservations now stretch into February, and 425,000 people have signed up to come. Wow. They've either come or they're coming in the future. And so this has been sort of embraced by the community that is the most gratifying thing, I think, that really could have happened in our opening month or two. Mm-hmm. And, but you asked how the institution came about. And that's, of course, a story that has a number of different kinds of starting points you could choose from. One is, 50 years, almost 50 years that Eli and Edythe Broad have been collecting art, have been engaged in art and very passionately involved with it. But really, after the first few years, they, and it was unusually early, people often collect, but they don't necessarily, even if they collect at a fairly large scale, put it together with public concerns as early as the Broads did. There are many, I won't name them all, but there are many ways in which they, as you know, they've been involved with the arts and with public institutions dedicated to the arts in Los Angeles. Los Angeles would not be what it is. The Los Angeles area would not be what it is without their philanthropy. But the Broad Museum is their latest initiative. So let me show a few images and make a few points about that. The main, really, the impetus behind the museum is very simple. It's to bring as wide an audience as possible to contemporary art. That's the fundamental desire and objective. We seem to be doing rather well in that regard so far. But building where we did had some other objectives, which was to improve that immediate area of downtown Los Angeles, of Grand Avenue, And so that's something that I'll talk about in just a couple minutes here. The museum world thrives on studies and data, and you'll be relieved to know I'm not going to show a lot of, although maybe in front of a public policy audience I shouldn't say this, but I'm not going to show a lot of data. But we, to a large extent, used our experience in the museum world to decide how to create this particular museum from scratch. It's a very rare thing to start a museum from zero. But we decided to make sure that the museum would be as accessible as possible, and free general admission was obviously a big step in that direction. We also wanted the museum to be as welcoming as possible. And that's an easy thing to say, and free admission, again, gets you partway down that road. But there is another factor that's very important in terms of leaving that impression on our visitors, and a few of you, even just tonight at the reception, commented on it unsolicited, and that is that I put a lot of emphasis on the training of the staff that are on the floor of the museum. Every museum does some variety of training, but we really, we devised a program over the course of almost 2 years using outside educational consultants to train the floor staff. And so you see part of our group of floor staff in that image there. And the idea was that, as you were saying earlier, Austin, whether you had a great deal of, whether you're an expert in the art world or whether you're new to contemporary art, you could come to this museum and there'd be people right there standing next to the painting or next to the artwork of whom you could ask a question. And whether it was a very basic question or a very sophisticated question, you were going to get an answer. You didn't have to wait for the tour at 2 o'clock. You didn't have to go to the website after you got home to try to look up the answer to your question. You would have it right there from someone very knowledgeable. And so you see some of them in action here in this image. And they, much to my delight, we were able to recruit a really great group. I got a really great manager to manage this group. And when you come to the museum, those of you who haven't been there yet, I think you'll really notice, and I hope that you'll take advantage of that floor staff, because it is a very unusual thing. And so that, in concert with free admission, I think is already bringing people back for more than one visit, and getting a very warm response from the public. We, maybe partly because of those features of the museum, this is an image from a local blogger, right, has an online, and I remember seeing this headline. Of course I get, the Google alerts and whatever. I remember seeing this headline that had something to do with us that was called the Children's Museum, and I thought, oh God, what is this? But it ended up being a piece that was actually very flattering about how welcoming we are to families, and how striking it was to this particular blogger, this visitor, to see so many kids not just there, but actually looking at the art. And that's really the best possible thing that could happen. That's what a museum is for. Now, in addition to that kind of incidental resource, we also, of course, do more formalized educational programming. We've partnered with outside organizations, coming from the standpoint that it's better, rather than reinvent the wheel, but to go out and look for people who are doing things well already and partner with them. So just one example of that is 826LA, which is a group based in, has 2 offices in the LA area, and it's focused largely on school children's literacy for underrepresented and various challenged communities. And we work with them to have them bring their kids in and their programming in and devise programming for other children. So children creating educational materials for kids. And I think that stands a higher chance of being interesting for kids than that which is devised by experts. Then I mentioned earlier the sort of interest in the civic environment and what role the museum plays in that. Part of the motivation for choosing downtown, for choosing Grand Avenue, comes from Eli Broad's long-standing interest in and his belief in the idea that every great city needs a great and vibrant center. And he's starting with being founding chairman of MoCA back in 1979, been very involved with Grand Avenue specifically. And so this image shows you what was there before we were there. Not much. And so the museum, in terms of being a great piece of public architecture, or what we hope to be, is a great piece of public architecture, plays an important role in the community, just in terms of the built environment, whether you go inside or not. And so here's an image of the cultural scene as it stands now on Grand Avenue. You have MoCA, of course, that's been there since 1979, that building specifically since 1986. I know, I was an intern there then. And then the Broad across the street from the Colburn School and across 2nd Street from Disney Hall. You have this really great nexus of cultural institutions right there on Grand Avenue, and specifically when it comes to contemporary art, you have what I think is really an incomparable opportunity as a visitor. When you combine a visit to MoCA on Grand Avenue and the Broad, I don't think you could find any place else where you'd get a better overview of what's important in art today. Here in Los Angeles, and I'm talking globally, I don't think there's another place where you'll see the scope of material and the quality of material that you're going to see by combining a visit to the two institutions. It's just a beautiful aerial shot of the Broad down on the lower right and downtown as it exists today. And, we've had tremendous, as I said, visitor response, not just in terms of attendance, but in terms of people staying for long periods of time. 2 and 3 hour visits is not unusual, and people coming back for repeated visits already. So it's been a really exciting journey, and although there are a number of cultural institutions, art institutions in Los Angeles, founded either by the wealth of one family or by a living founder, Huntington, Getty, Hammer, et cetera. It's been an interesting journey to create a museum in downtown, free general admission, completely funded by the Broads and the Broad Foundation, with some partnering with the city. It feels like a success in terms of private initiative within the public sector.
Mm-hmm. So let's go back to the intersection now. You mentioned the city, I know the county, CRA played a role. How did that policy or how did that practice, where did it start? So what early conversations? Right,
so the Grand Avenue is an area that, and Bunker Hill in general, is an area that has been undergoing what might be the slowest motion redevelopment, or one of the slower ones, let's say, in any city, right? The history of Bunker Hill goes back to the 50s and the 60s, the redevelopment of Bunker Hill, when what was then considered a fairly blighted neighborhood was, to make a long story short, razed and divided into these various segments that were intended to be developed all in one fell swoop. The fell swoop has taken a few decades, so the city and the county's involvement with Bunker Hill has had a long, long history. A more recent part of that history has been something that Eli actually was very involved with, although when he first became involved with it about just around when Disney Hall opened, around 2002, 2003. He had no design, no plan. We didn't have any plan to establish a museum in that very place. But when Disney Hall, largely with Eli's help and the help of many others, finally opened in 2003, I think Eli looked around at that section of Grand Avenue, saw empty lots like I showed in the image there, and said, we've got to do something. We've got to make this the cultural center that he felt it could be. So a joint powers authority was created. I know this is a long-winded answer.
No, that's all right. That's good. I think for this audience, okay. Yeah.
Hopefully. So a joint powers authority was created, which was charged with holding a competition and finding an appropriate developer for the remaining parcels right there along that 2-block stretch of Grand. And Related Companies was awarded this at a rather interesting time, which was right around the time that the economy crashed, and that slowed down the actual construction that was going to happen there. But that Joint Powers Authority, which was combined city and county officials, are part of that body because parts of those parcels along Grand Avenue were owned by the city, parts were owned by the county. They don't usually cooperate on projects, but they did here, partly with Eli's encouragement. So we found ourselves in 2010, after a long saga of trying to find the right location for a Broad Museum, in front of that very body that he had sort of helped create, seeking entitlements to build the museum.
And is that a good experience, bad experience? Is it something we should seek as a community to replicate? Would it have happened any other way absent that sort of body being in place?
I mean, I think that it's an idiosyncratic process, that particular story of Grand Avenue. But the general notion of a city or a governmental entity providing a certain amount, a sort of platform on which then private funds can be deployed to create a public resource, I think that is a good thing.
Yeah, it would seem to me kind of simple, right? If it's one, at its core, municipalities can entitle infrastructure for a football stadium or a cultural institution.
Right.
Unique, at least in our experience regionally, the county and city working together, but maybe they could do more of that. How long did that process kind of start to finish?
It was, it felt like forever at the time, but I think it was somewhere between 6 months and a year, the whole process. You know, we had been looking for the right site for the museum for quite a while. From, I would say about 2005, I had been looking for the right site for something. Originally, it wasn't a full-fledged museum, but it was a permanent facility for the art collection. And so, it was a long process. It was a political process, as it should be. And those aren't always easy.
Right.
But it turned out all right.
Relative economics, so what the Broads and the private philanthropy, roughly X, and Y would be the city, county, what's the split, roughly?
Not counting the art collection itself, which in essence functionally is also a gift to the city and has a value that'll far outstrip what I'm about to mention. Mm-hmm. But the minimum endowment and the expense of building the building is about $350 million.
And the public contribution?
Well, the public contribution, I mean, in fact, to build the museum, we made a one-time payment, which was essentially a long-term ground lease. Those funds were earmarked for affordable housing in the apartment tower that was built next to the museum, not by us, but by Related. And so there's that piece, but there were public amenities connected to the museum that the JPA, the Joint Powers Authority, participated in financially, and the Community Redevelopment Agency. So that included a public plaza, a 26,000 square foot public plaza that now is well used every day. And also a 360-something space garage under the museum. And the public participation there through the Community Redevelopment Agency was very substantial in that regard. It was, I believe, around $50 million.
Mm-hmm. So just on the entitlement base infrastructure piece, recommendations for policymakers, how do you scale that? How do you do that again? How do you make it better the next time around?
How do you make it better the next time around? I don't know. I won't be the person doing it the next time around. I think that, I think that it's working well. What we've done is working well. So, the garage is well used, the plaza is very well used, and I forgot to mention the streetscape. We've put in a crosswalk, greened the sidewalks, which seem like maybe subtle gestures, but they're very important to improving the environment there and the walkability of that part of Grand Avenue. Mm-hmm. We won't be doing it again, but that's not because it's not a good thing to have done.
So now you're built in infrastructure as an independent private institution. Is there a further intersection? You mentioned education, marketing. I don't know. I've seen signs all over town. Is that you? Is that the community?
That's us.
That's you.
That's
so you
us,
just
yeah.
buy and rent those just like any other third party might.
Yes, the street banners, if that's what you're referring to. Yeah. The street banners are used by many, mainly cultural institutions. And there are all sorts of rules around who gets to use them, how you use them, but you pay for them. Yes.
You pay.
Yeah.
And the link with educational institutions, again, you're funding or they are? Is there any role?
We're funding everything, really, when it comes to all the programming of the museum. Like 826LA that I mentioned before, we're making everything possible for them. They're only offering, we're making everything possible for them to create programming for our audience, right? Mm-hmm. And they're offering their expertise.
So still off your bottom, if you will. I mean, you're mm-hmm. taking the lead there. Mm-hmm. Now, how does your institution start to connect with MoCA or mm-hmm. Disney or Red Cat in the basement there, or just in the neighborhood? How does that work?
Well, in various ways, we've connected with all three in very concrete ways. There was just a concert, actually, at Red Cat. We made a decision early on that, in a way, I think forces us to be good partners with our neighbors, and that is that instead of building a stage like this, or even smaller than this, which tends to eat up a lot of your available space in a building like ours, right? To do a raked auditorium, et cetera, it eats up an enormous amount of space, and we wanted to maximize the gallery space in the building. And I remember Eli and I were looking at this problem and thinking about, well, where are we going to have programming? And I said, we'll be in a neighborhood of auditoria. There's nothing but theaters around there. And yes, of course, you would have to work around the schedules of those various venues. But we just, like I say, used Red Cat for a music program that's connected to the collection that we're presenting called Callings Out of Context, sold out program. Then just the week before that, we had a program at Disney Hall that was featuring Eli and Elizabeth Diller, the architect of the museum. And so we're partnering in very real ways with all the institutions around us. And with MoCA, of course, we have a long and deep history of working with them, but in the immediate past, they've been sort of working with us to find ways to bring our audience across the street, use that crosswalk between the two institutions, and they've done promotions like offering free memberships for the first 2 weeks that we were open, offering memberships for free to anyone who came with a Broad ticket, things like that. I think organically these partnerships are going to evolve. Deborah Borda, president of the Phil, is on our board, the Broad's board. And so I'm in, she's on sabbatical now, but I'm in fairly regular contact with her. And, we've talked about them. We've talked with them about doing lots of different kinds of programming.
Mm-hmm. And how do you get that to go beyond the neighborhood? So California African American Museum, what's the facilities here on the west side? I don't know, the Reagan Library in Simi. Is there a collaborative of organizations in the region who think like this, start to work together, or not yet?
There are various organizations, but I think that more could be done. I mean, I think the honest truth of the matter is collaboration is hard. It's a lot easier to just sort of do your own thing and be sort of on your own, and it's harder to work with and communicate with and mesh with another institution's staff. But I do think that it's important to do that. It's important to trade ideas. I remember when we were planning the museum, just to name one simple example, there was of course, many points at which we were thinking about accessibility for those who have impairments or, various issues might have various issues accessing the galleries or the images, et cetera. And, I was a little surprised to find that for cultural organizations, there's no consortium of any kind that looks at those issues, whereas in New York City, there is. I found that resource and sort of used it and sort of brought some of that information to bear in our planning. But, so I think there could be a lot more.
Is that those institutions put together, or is government the convener, or?
Mm-mm. No, not to my knowledge, anyway. I mean, this group in New York, it's a specialized group of professionals from each of the organizations that have visitor services responsibilities, and maybe someone took the lead, but they took it upon themselves in one sense or another to have a group that specifically looks at access.
Tell me a little bit about, I know it's early, and you don't know yet, but the demographics, who comes?
It is very early. We haven't done what I would consider a completely solid survey yet. We will, I think, before the end of the year. When I walk the galleries during our public hours, I feel like I'm seeing Los Angeles. I am seeing families, I'm seeing people from all walks of life, I'm seeing people of all ethnicities in the galleries, which is really, really, really great to see. The very kind of preliminary survey data is showing that is true. My eyes are not deceiving me. And we are also finding, it seems so far, that it's really a museum that is reaching Angelenos right now, or people from the Los Angeles area. We're talking about, 80–85% of our visitorship seems to be based in LA. So, and I think that's, while I do want to be sure to keep an eye on the cultural tourism factor, I think it's great that the city has embraced the museum the way that it has.
Yeah, it's remarkable. Just in my own, I've been there twice, and I think I was telling you both times I encountered people from Germany.
Yeah.
And I thought, wow, where do you see that in Los Angeles? Plus the diversity of the crowd that is there.
Yeah.
And same in the education. So I know you're working with a couple different institutions, but the idea is ultimately to draw students, kids in from around the region, or how do you tie educational programs to what you're doing?
Well, we just had a family weekend yesterday and Saturday, and we had 1,300 people attend that. That's in addition to our normal visitorship, just coming to the galleries. And you know, again, we haven't sort of measured or taken survey data from those groups that came quite yet, but again, it was a visitorship that looked and felt like Los Angeles.
So looking out sort of half a decade, your goals, the Broad's goals, beyond what you're doing, what's next? How do you add to that? What else is yet undone?
Well, programming-wise, next year we will start special exhibitions, or my head of communications and marketing keeps telling me not to say special exhibitions because they're all special, but temporary exhibitions that rotate. There are 2 floors of gallery space for those of you who haven't been to the museum. There's a 3rd floor, and then there's also quite a bit of gallery space on the ground floor. And that ground floor space will start to rotate with exhibitions, mainly monographic. And it'll be interesting to see how that changes or doesn't change our visitorship. And I think that also now that we've opened our doors, it will be, you know, I can focus a bit more on the collaborative possibilities with other institutions in the neighborhood, whether that might someday involve, you know, a festival that involves more than just art museums, but maybe connects art and music, for example. We're doing a little bit of that in our you know, in our programming now. Like I mentioned, we had a concert at the Red Cat Theater, and so we have, you know, great ambitions for the future of the institution.
How do you think it's, you know, we talk about infrastructure and entitlement, and this is more broad than just your institution, since you have the benefit of being free. Mm-hmm. How much of a barrier is that for some of the other institutions? And just you guys came to the decision you wanted it to be free. Tell us a little bit about that, how you got there. And
Right. We weren't sure at first that we would be a free general admission museum, but you know, when you look at the I said I didn't look at any data. I did look at data in this area. But, you know, when you look at museums that have a charge and then they become free general admission, most of them experience as much as a 50% increase in attendance. And so that was kind of, you know, that was, because we wanted to reach a wide audience, and because you see that over and over and over again in existing museums, it seemed like the right thing to do, and we were able to do it. We have the funding in place to be able to do that. What you find with museum, at least in terms of art museums, you find that the larger institutions, whether you're talking about the Metropolitan Museum in New York or MoMA in New York, the interesting thing is that those institutions that get a huge proportion or a very large proportion of cultural tourism, they're quite a bit more reliant on the revenue from admissions than other institutions, and when you have a large tourism base and you're not, those people are going to come usually once or once in a great while. It doesn't make sense for those institutions to let go of that revenue. In Los Angeles, it's a little different situation. And, you know, but bottom line for us, we felt that for general admission, for seeing the collection, it was important to be free.
Mm-hmm. You touch on a thing I've observed, I've heard people say that we seem to punch below our weight a little bit in this issue of cultural tourism. Mm-hmm. Your sense true, not true? If so, why?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is the case. On the one hand, as you were saying earlier, you know, cultural tourism is an incredibly important economic factor in Los Angeles in general, the tourism industry. But on the other hand, compared to most of the major European capitals or to New York, we really aren't getting the number of cultural tourists that those cities are getting at all. And we need to work on that.
Work on it by, obviously more institutions would help, but for those we have, what could we do to better help tell their story?
Well, I think that marketing is part of it. Marketing's a huge part of it. Marketing, obviously, outside of Los Angeles. I think that could be done better. I think that the tourism market probably doesn't put first and foremost the cultural offerings of Los Angeles on their list of reasons to visit Los Angeles. Once they're here, they do visit museums. They do visit cultural attractions. But I do think that I think that the contemporary art realm may end up being the leader out, taking us out of that realm. Because I do feel that, it's been an ambition of Eli's, to make Los Angeles a contemporary art capital of the world. And, you hear people agreeing with that from outside of LA more and more often all the time. And so I think that Los Angeles as a very contemporary city, Los Angeles as a place with its eye sort of on the future in a sense, and with that future being seen through the lens of artists who are based here, is becoming more and more apparent and it manifests in the city. And I do think, personal prediction over time, that's going to be where LA comes out of that sort of punching below the weight place and moves forward.
And I'm just curious, and you may not know this, in the Broad collection, sort of what portion might be represented by artists who have an Angelino tie of some sort? I mean, therefore, is it driven by the work of the artists, or is it driven by the community and how we express ourselves?
Yeah, and I don't know that I've run that number recently, but I would say it's about, in terms of artists who are based here.
Based or have some connection or something?
Well, I mean, those who are living and working here, maybe a third or so of the artists in the collection, but it's growing all the time. And we make more studio visits to artists we're considering for the collection here in LA than anywhere else now. And that wasn't always true. More artists are moving to Los Angeles, contemporary artists. More artists who get their training here are not leaving Los Angeles. And it's a very dynamic and growing aspect of the city, the contemporary art scene.
And would that skew be unique to the Broad and the collection, or that's representative of the market as a whole?
No, it's just true. If collectors in Los Angeles are not always seeking artists from other cities, you can make a really amazing contemporary art collection probably just out of artists that are living and working here now. And I remember, just on a very anecdotal level, maybe, 6 months or so ago, going to a particular event and hearing, it was an event celebrating an artist who's based here, and there were a lot of people from the New York, especially the art market, visiting that show and that event. And a number of them were just saying, I can't not come to Los Angeles. You now have to come to Los Angeles if you want to understand what's happening with contemporary art. And that's, I hope true of the Broad as a museum, but they were speaking especially of artists who were emerging.
That's great. Let's broaden this conversation a little bit, and I think there are a couple of mics in the audience. Give a chance for anybody who might be joining us today to ask a question of Joanne or myself about the more broad topic. So looking out, someone will bring up the lights.
Austin, this is for you, actually. Can you share with us your perspective from many angles? You could share your opinion, but especially with your year in City Hall. You were deputy mayor for a year. You had a perspective of how important it was to develop our economy in Los Angeles in many ways. And I imagine you have some experience and some thoughts about the importance of the arts to the economy of Los Angeles and the bigger picture of that.
I guess I have the luxury of being, I can be less polite than Joanne is in terms of talking about these institutions. I happened to, in my time as deputy mayor, oversaw the CRA. So as Eli and Joanne were on one side, I was overseeing the actors on behalf of the city who are on the other side. And in that set of conversations, I was struck by the lack of interest. It got done. It got done with a few committed individuals, but nothing like the scrum, probably mixing metaphors, that would follow football, because they're both occurring around the same time, and I also was involved as a point person for the city in trying to bring football to downtown. And football to downtown, you could fill within the city hall itself a room this large with people who are interested, and the Broad Museum downtown, where there was the few, the proud, but not filled the room. I was just struck by that.
Now you tell me.
Yeah. But it got done because it is important, and you have to find that balance. But there aren't enough folks, I think, in the body politic who really understand the importance of institutions like the place we're at today, or the Broad Museum, or LACMA, or you can take your pick. I think the other thing I saw, to the point about cultural tourism and the impact on the community as a whole, it's not well marketed. One of the areas I was involved in as well was the marketing of the city of Los Angeles. And I had a sort of an odd experience when I visited China and met with the head of the Shanghai Tourist Bureau, who told me, much to her pleasant surprise, that wasn't a coincidence, because I was visiting, and just the day before, the tourist folks from Beverly Hills had been there to market coming to visit Beverly Hills. Now in this audience we say, well, that's Beverly Hills, Los Angeles, shouldn't we be working together? So I don't think it's just the institutions themselves who have this, maybe not rivalry, but it's hard to work together. It's hard for the Broad to even go across the street to the MoCA and say, what can we do together? It's equally hard for Beverly Hills and Los Angeles and Santa Monica to think about broadening the base of supporters and tourists from around, and I think we could do a lot there. I think government can be that convener in that place and help do a better job.
Thank you very, very much. I haven't had the honor of going to the Broad stage downtown, but I certainly appreciate, the Broad Museum, but I certainly appreciate the Broad stage here. It's been great. I'm a Santa Monica resident. I wanted to ask you, especially as the former publisher of the LA Times, one of your great political cartoonist has a sculpture here called Chain Reaction. It's a 26-foot tall public art sculpture that's now landmarked, that was gifted to the city, and the community came together, and it's now been saved, and it's going to be restored. What is your view about public art, even thought-provoking, controversial public art in communities? And is there any public art on the grounds of the Broad Museum in LA? That's my question.
I'll touch on that, and then I'll turn over to Joanne, I guess. I think all form of public expression in general, within the bounds of respect for individuals' rights and others' rights and so on, should be encouraged. I was pleasantly surprised when I visited, but also to hear Joanne think about, as they think about the museum, it seems like it's more than just the box. You're part of a neighborhood, you're part of a community, and I think communities having public art make them better communities. But you may speak a little bit to how you thought about the surround and the neighborhood.
Well, we built every single inch that we could occupy the building fills out its entire entitlements, right? So we didn't, other than the plaza, we didn't really have an opportunity for a traditional form of public art, large-scale sculpture. We thought about that for the plaza, But, and, you know, someday maybe something like that could still happen, but it seemed to us that having a little tiny bit of green space, we brought in these 100-year-old olive trees, we made a space for respite, a space for the community that's very well used now. Given the size of our plaza, that would make more sense. So in that traditional sense of having sort of a large-scale sculpture, we didn't really seriously consider that. But as a free general admission museum, I consider the whole museum a piece of sort of public art in a sense. All the art in it is public art. Yes.
I wondered from both sides, whether from the city side and from the museum side, was that subway stop or the metro stop already planned? Or was this something that you all had to work together to get metro to put the stop there near all of those cultural institutions?
Right. So the question is about public transportation in Los Angeles, and then more specifically about the subway stop that will be built, I guess now 2021, not 2020, but that will be built, you know, on the Hope Street side of the museum. And was that something that we sort of tried to initiate? That it'd be nice to take credit for that, but we didn't really. That was already in the planning stages when the museum came about. We did, to be in all candor, we did try to actually move that stop to let out right on Grand Avenue rather than on Hope Street. For those of you familiar with Bunker Hill, it's a little bit of a walk up from Hope Street up to Grand Avenue, and that seemed a little inconvenient. But frankly, that's part of the reason why we were asked by the CRA to build the plaza that is south of the museum. It, in essence, creates a bit of a much more pleasant passage from the future metro stop across Hope, and then you can get up to Grand using our plaza. I probably should bring that slide back to explain it, but and that just for further explanation, that line is called the Regional Connector, and it is just 3 stops, 4 stops, very few, but what it you know, as the very exciting name would imply, it connects all the various lines so that you'd be able to, you know, once the Expo line is open here to Santa Monica, you'd be able to get on here in Santa Monica on the Expo line, ride all the way out to, I guess, you know, Pasadena and beyond on the Gold line with 1 seat, instead of having to transfer 1 or 2 times to go across town. I do think that the boom of downtown, which some people still insist on saying is a temporary thing and it's all going to die away the way it kind of did in the 80s when there was a sort of a boom downtown and then it faded away. I don't think that that's likely to happen for a variety of reasons, and one of them is the infrastructure that's now in place. You know, when you look at a map of the metro system, it all converges on downtown. And I think that's going to play an important role in making this change in the complexion of the city and the sort of downtown as a true center of the city on many levels, not just a business level, going to make that stick.
Yeah, just to add a little bit to that, I think that metro connection was long planned, probably insufficient in that there's still not enough connectivity from public transportation. And each and every stop is its own history. The most immediate neighbor is less enthusiastic about the close proximity of public transportation. The Disney Hall views itself as sort of a reference recording studio. And whether it's submerged 50 feet, 75 feet, or 175 feet, there are those in that field who think it's somehow going to make a difference on their ability to record certain sounds or have the presence of trains in certain performances of theirs. So it's tricky, more is needed, but in this particular instance, I think it's going to help enliven the neighborhood.
Yeah, it's anticipated to handle, was it 9,000 people a day, or, I mean, it's a very large number of ridership.
Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Ashley. I go to SMC, and first I'd like to thank you both for your time today. My question is, how would you persuade someone who is either in public policy or someone who, let's say, isn't passionate so much about the arts to either support the arts and actually pour money into it? And what are the benefits of the arts on youth and our society in general?
Well, you're preaching the converted here, so I'm not sure that either of us would be objective. But I found, at least in my time in the public arena, to try to equate it to jobs. So the economic development, you may not be into art, you may not appreciate what it can do in terms of bringing a community together or giving young people a way to express themselves before they can use this voice, they can find other voices. So there are lots of, I think, long-term benefits, but the common denominator in most things is if you can create jobs and a tax base, almost everyone in the city will come along, whether it's labor, whether it's political elected leadership who aren't that involved. That I found was, I'm going to say the lowest common denominator because it's really important, but that was the easiest way to broaden the tent and bring more leadership involved, elected leadership involved. I don't know, you might have a different view.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I think some people don't think about is the fact that cultural institutions add tremendous value, and I don't mean that just economically, but just quality of life to a city. And a city that has great quality of life is going to attract a great workforce. And that has, an indirect economic impact that's that shouldn't be underestimated. And then I think, there's the, more, the sort of grander notion of just the fact that for a healthy democracy, you need institutions that are looking at culture, that are presenting culture, that are giving us all an opportunity to understand the way others think, the way, it's just an incredibly important part of a healthy democracy to have great museums, great libraries, great theaters, all these places for self-reflection and self-definition.
Thank you.
Hi, good evening. My name is Robert. I'm also an SMC student. And my question is for Joanne. I wanted to know, how did you choose the artists that went into the Broad, and how did you curate the museum through the artists' views? Were there any political standpoints that maybe you guys didn't agree with, made you not choose artists, or anything like that?
Well, it's been a long process. I mean, there's the selection of the artists who were in the inaugural installation in the museum. There are over 200 artists in the collection, and I think there are 60 to 65 artists in the opening installation. So it's a large number of our artists, but not every artist that's in the collection. And the collection's been developing for decades, so it's been a long sort of organic process. But I would say, you mentioned, art with a political viewpoint, and that's actually a real hallmark of the Broad collection, is artwork that in a very direct way takes on sometimes quite sensitive political topics. So for example, there's a beautiful charcoal drawing by an artist named Robert Longo that is an image of the riots in Ferguson, Missouri. And it's a work that we acquired obviously very recently and made it into the inaugural installation. There's also a work by an artist named Barbara Kruger that is an image that served as a sort of placard or the main image for the Women's March on Washington in 1989. There's work by Mark Bradford, a Los Angeles-based artist who
CalArts grad, I might add.
What's
A
that?
CalArts grad, I might add.
Yes, that's right. Who makes incredible work that has a pretty strong political stance. So that's definitely not been something that we've shied away from at all. Work with, in fact, one TV interview I had before the museum opened, I was asked, like, how can you show such controversial art in the museum? You asked, how do we choose artists? And that's harder to pick apart. We tend to, a hallmark of the collection is collecting artists' works in depth, taking an individual artist and following their work over a long period of time. It's, we've always avoided being a sort of trophy collection, one of this, one of that, sort of all the right names. So that means that we often wait and watch an artist's work for quite a while before we buy it.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes.
My name's Tanner. I'm a Santa Monica College student, and I'm wondering if the Broad has any plans of collaborating with local colleges and getting the students involved in the future.
Well, I'm proud to say that in that absolutely stellar Visitor Services Associates group I was talking about earlier, we have some SMC students, I think. I don't know if any of them are here tonight, but, so I think that's one way for students to get involved. We're certainly very interested in having all of the classes that are in art or art history come and visit the museum, and we facilitate that as much as we possibly can. So those are the basic ways so far that we, I guess, collaborate with colleges around town.
Great, thank you.
Hello? Okay. Hi, good evening. My question is for Joanne, sorry.
It's okay.
Where did you get the funding to build the museum? Where the money came from? And is it donation? Is it from the city? And the second question is, I understand there is no fees to access the museum, so who pays for the, for everything? For the employees, for the water, electricity? Thank you.
Well, all of the funding comes from Mr. and Mrs. Broad and their foundation. They're longtime philanthropists in the Los Angeles area, Broad Stage. They made a contribution to this to SMC to make this this theater possible. And so we the same funding makes the free general admission possible.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Sam. I'm also an SMC student. So I was thinking that seeing as many people here are also SMC students, I was wondering what's the best way that we could get involved in helping promote this, the Broad Museum and
Facebook, Instagram. I don't mean to be so basic, but it's true. Spread the word. I should say, I hear constantly from people who are having a hard time getting their free ticket reserved to come to the museum. And I should mention that you don't have to have a reservation to come to the museum. You can often come spontaneously and just come inside. But first of all, visit, obviously, and then talk about it with your friends. Bring your friends back, bring your family. It's really as simple as that. We don't actually have, at this point anyway, sort of support groups that many museums do that are formalized. So really, it's just a matter of visiting. thebroad.org.
Just a quick question. As part of, over here, sorry, of a member of the Colburn School, I know that there are plans to include children or like youth into the arts, and you guys are doing that through the production of the Nutcracker. Do you see a future, or like, yeah, like a future including the students, the younger kids that come from Colburn in some sort of art collection in the Broad stage? Because I know you guys are doing some collaborations with whatever's around in downtown.
Right. Well, I have a 6-year-old daughter, and she and my even younger son go to Colburn, or they go to the community school of Colburn, which is incredible. You know, I think, you know, what the Colburn School does for school kids is absolutely terrific. It's amazing. We have had a few performers from the formal school, the academy, come and perform at the museum, and we hope to do more with the Colburn.
So to wrap things up, I might take advantage of being the moderator just to re-engage all of you. We'll be talking about this nexus of policy in the arts, and we've talked about two legs of the stool, sort of policymakers, elected officials. We've talked about the private sector, whether it's individual philanthropists or other sources of funding, and I think there is a third part to that, which is all of you, and it would be my observation that I think we could accept as a truism that these types of institutions make our community better. And the support of folks like yourselves in all those same ways, whether it's social media or wearing sandwich boards, but when institutions like this want to have an entitled next door and expansion, whether it's being discussed, the role of arts in schools and education, or entitling the next Broad Museum, be vocal, be visible, and I think we'll have more success with institutions like that. So I want to thank you all for taking the time to join us. I want to thank Joanne for taking the time to share the Broad experience.
Pleasure to be here.
And I'll turn it over to our colleague for further remarks.
Friends, it's my great pleasure to introduce to you Allegra Clegg, who's on the Advisory Council for our Public Policy Institute, and she's going to share a bit with us about what's to come, and particularly talk about the Nutcracker performances that'll take place here at the Broad stage.
Thank you. First of all, I want to thank our speakers tonight, Austin and Joanne. It was really lovely to hear about the arts and what you've contributed towards them in our city. I've had the opportunity to see the Broad Museum, and it is an amazing museum and a little gem for our city to have and to be proud of. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
West Side Ballet is a nonprofit pre-professional ballet company here in Santa Monica, and I'm the executive director on the board of directors of our nonprofit. We have a ballet school in Santa Monica. We've been here over 40 years, and we have the longest running Nutcracker production. It's a classical ballet, and it's a great Christmas tradition. In the last 3 years, we've collaborated with the Broad Stage and the City of Santa Monica and Santa Monica College to have our Nutcracker performances here, Thanksgiving weekend and the weekend following. So we've been fortunate to have this amazing space to fulfill our mission for performing arts, and we keep our ticket prices low so that the public can come see a full ballet, as well as they're accompanied by the Santa Monica College Symphony Orchestra, so the children can hear a live music performed with the ballet, which is very unusual in Los Angeles in particular. But sometimes not only, like a professional company might not have an orchestra, and they'll use recorded music, and so it's a different experience. So we're really proud that we've collaborated with the city the last couple of years, and we'll grow that. But one of our main missions is to educate children and to show them what classical arts can bring to them. So the children that perform the ballet, they have the discipline of going to ballet class, they have to perform, they have to show up on time, be dedicated to their art, and collaborate with the other dancers and present themselves to you as an audience. And that is a great life lesson. I know myself as a dancer growing up, I had that experience, and I think it really helped my career in the film business as a producer in the movie business, to know that you have to work hard, you have to show up on time, and you have to collaborate with many people. So that was a great gift for myself, and I try to continue that with our organization. And beyond that, what we do with the Santa Monica Malibu schools is we collaborate and bring in fifth graders to see free performances, an educational performance where they hear about the ballet, they see the ballet, they get to ask questions of the dancers, and then have lunch with them. So it's an amazing field trip for them. Some of them have never seen classical ballet, they've never heard classical music live, and they get that experience, and they always say you never know what they take home with that. And you might have one kid who just hears that music and then, you know, might hear it at the mall again and say, I know what that music is. It's Tchaikovsky's Nutcracker Suite. And I just don't know. I don't know how it touches them, but I know it touches them. And the other thing we do every year, and we've done this for many, many years, is bring children from all over the city to see the Nutcracker Ballet for free, as well as our spring performance. And they come from organizations such as Police Athletic League, Kids in Sports, Neighborhood Youth Association, the Venice Family Clinic, Westside Children's Center, which helps foster children. So again, it's trying to build the education and the community outreach through our organization. And I'm really grateful that Richard and Sherry have had, that the Public Policy Institute is combining what policymakers can do to help the arts in our community, which then grows the education of our children that way. So I want to say thank you, and I'm glad to be on the as part of this organization. So I just want to say, everybody, we have the Nutcracker on Thanksgiving weekend and the weekend after, and that kind of finalizes this whole institution's forum for this fall forum. So thank you so much, and thank you again to our speakers and to Richard and Sherry.
Oh, thank you.
So, thank you.
I don't get from the public policy.
Oh, very nice.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think we're done.